Well, good evening, folks. It's Monday night. Nice to have you here. I'm still getting a little set up here. Pardon my tinkering with things. Just making sure the camera's aligned right. Everything's always moved over the weekend, so here we are. Good to have you here. I want to say hi to everybody who's here. Audrey, nice to have you here. Glad you are here. Audrey is our Girl Friday here between my show and the Rocky Stucci Hour, which is the Situation Room. And she does a lot of stuff for us, and we appreciate it. Nice to see you here, Audrey. Susie Q, Fran, Brianna, Joyce, good to see you all here so far. And I think more are coming in. So we'll just get rolling here very quickly. And I want to say, if you want to see the Situation Room with Rocky Stucci and me, the broadcast is a radio broadcast, but we simulcast here on YouTube. So if you don't get a chance to hear the radio show, but you can tune into your YouTube, you also get to see us, some of the antics and some of the visuals. So it's kind of fun doing the radio show, except, when just doing strict radio, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. It doesn't matter if your hair's standing on end. It doesn't matter what's going on. But I just had to check and make sure I had my coffee here. But with the simulcast, it's like a little bit like being on TV, except we don't do the makeup and all of that stuff, and we don't have the money. So there you go. So tonight, I have forecast, predestined, pre-told, also pre-mandated that I'm going to be talking a little bit about things that I get really tired of talking about because everybody else talks about them. And that is the really big current events, like what we have seen with the shootings over the weekend. I seriously, folks, have even stayed away from the first couple of days of getting into really knowing all the details of what happened. So far as I know, there are 31 people dead from shootings over the weekend. Two of them, I think there were three even, if you count them all up, including the ones you don't hear as much about. And I think there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. And you may have heard some of that already. This is from my perspective. But tonight I was actually thinking of doing the tarot readings, moving those to Monday nights, because I think that would be an easier night to do them all together after the weekend. So maybe next week we'll start on Monday night. Monday nights, by the way, next Monday is next Monday. Today is the 5th, so it's 2 weeks from today is the launch of my new show, which is really a revival of my old show, the Intrepid Radio program. And I used to do that with John Ward, and now it's just me. And we'll be launching on the Odyssey Network. And so we'll be a nationally syndicated show. Actually, probably internationally, but nationally is good for now. And it'll be the same time slot here, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Left Coast. And you can catch me here as well. We're going to simulcast it on YouTube the same way we do the Situation Room. So I'll always be here, and you'll be able to join in here, have a chat room. I will have a call line, so I'll be able to take calls on this show. So I'm looking forward to that as well, giving you the opportunity to call in and talk to me, and me the opportunity to hang up on you if I don't like what you're saying. So that'll be fun. So that's really all I have as far as getting some things out of the way before we get into it here. And I want to talk about this, and hopefully it's from a slightly different perspective than what you have heard. I had a friend message me today, and I would qualify this friend as somebody who is an intellectual, somebody who probably used to be a lot more liberal than he is now, but has drifted over to the more conservative side of things. He's the person where I really got, if you've ever heard me say, I'm a small c conservative with a libertarian bent, I kind of got that from him many years ago. And So that's kind of really where I'm at. And so even today, he said to me, I'm a conservative. So apparently, this and that, we were talking about things. And the first thing he said to me, and I'm just kind of scrolling back here, he said to me, "Holy shit." That comes across on my phone. And then he said, "The country is losing its fucking mind." And he's absolutely correct about that. And the thing about this, what's going on now, is the reason I don't really like talking about these types of major events is because everybody's saying the same thing. Whether you're on the left, the right, or somewhere in between, everybody's got their 2 cents to put in. And so even for tonight's show, I've taken a couple of notes and I've got some articles hanging in the wings I want to make reference to. But overall, you're going to hear me shooting from the hip on this. Part of the reason I don't really like talking about these things is unlike, say, historical mysteries or biblical mysteries, which I talk to very well, to textual criticisms and things of that nature, to talking about things like ghosts or the paranormal or the metaphysical. Those are easier to talk about because, um, frankly, because they're open ended. Your experience kind of dictates what you're going to talk about. My experience may differ from somebody else's. And I know myself, so I know I'm not crazy. So I know my experience is pretty on the mark. And so talking about those things is easier. This kind of stuff, I don't like. um, I'm going to reference some of the Facebook posts I've talked in today. And I have found that I could waste a hell of a lot of my life talking to people online about this stuff. When I post political posts on my social media and my Facebook threads and things like that, it takes really a relatively small amount of time. And I will comment on them throughout the day here and there. On occasion, get into heavy discussions with people. But for the most part, I like to stay away from those. I like to clear all that stuff off of my boards by simplifying what I have to say. By not by sometimes I'll type a long argument and I stop and I erase it and I think I've got to say this in a more concise way that is not coming across as if I am drawing somebody into battle with me. That I've set my battle in array and we must go at and have at on the battlefield in individual combat. I try to avoid that as much as I can these days. But there are some things that do get said that I've just got to respond to. And the things that drive me absolutely insane after a tragic event like these shootings is everybody wants to take a stance on who to blame, who to point fingers at. Um, I have so many leftist, liberal, progressive friends that I know that like to absolutely bombard my threads when I talk about these things. So sometimes I stay away from it. Sometimes I post very little. It all depends on how much of a fight I feel like for that day. And by fight, I mean I'm not out looking to peck a fight. As Mel Gibson said in Braveheart, I'm out to make a comment, to perhaps state my opinion on something, to state things the way I see them. And then everybody wants to come in and somebody said today to me, "Are you sure like pushing buttons?" And I say, I don't push buttons at all. I post topics, I talk about topics. Other people want to come in and push my buttons thinking that I'm going to respond. Sometimes I do. So today I've seen such a varied array of responses to this thing, and exactly what you thought would happen has happened. Why, what happened yesterday is some kind of breaking point. I don't know. Perhaps it's because there was more than one of them on the same day from unrelated people, so far as we know, in different cities in the country. I believe I had heard from a friend of mine that was in Chicago. He was posting about there being two shootings in Chicago yesterday, while there was also one down in Texas and there was one in Ohio, and that none of these things were related. And the shootings in Texas were different. Um, not political reasonings behind them. Some of them were gang related and things like that. So you have all different kinds of reasons that these things have taken place. And now I look at this, and one of the responses that I see coming from people, and I've got some notes that I wrote down on an envelope of all things. Um, there's this thing that I have noticed about these types of events, and there have been several of them over. They've really recorded them going back all the way to 1966 or 67. These mass shootings, and they've gotten progressively worse over the years. They one of the and everybody's got a different number. It's everywhere from, we've had, I don't know, 240 deaths to 1,250 deaths by mass shootings in the last 20 years or 30 years or 50 years. It all depends on what set of numbers you're looking at and what criteria that is being used to create the category for which they place a mass shooting into. Mass shooting over 3 people, mass shooting 1 or more. So it's like they did with school shootings last year, where they said there have now been 19 school shootings for the first month of the year, when in reality, some of those were, yes, school shootings, mass shootings. Some of them were 2 gang members got in a fight at nighttime on school parking lot property, and 1 guy got shot. And they called that school shootings. So it all depends on who's doing the categorizing and who's wrapping up the statistics. So to say that there were 247 people killed since 1982, and I think that person even said since 1990. So again, there's all kinds of numbers all over the place. And everybody likes to throw in the caveat, but of course, 1 is too many. Yes, 1 is too many. Any kind of heinous, tragic killing of innocent people that involves men, women, and children by some idiot, some politico, some sick person, some psychotic, all of these things have very different evaluations as to how to plug them into the category. And this is what has become a problem. And I don't like talking about these things so fresh after they've happened because there's so many facts yet to come up. But one thing I can say is that after each incident that we've experienced in the last 20 years, our innocence loses. It's after all of this evil, all these horrors, each one we lose our innocence a little bit more. But then, as I heard one guy put it today, I was listening to Sam Harris. We lose our innocence, but then it comes back again. It's almost like we forget. It's like a woman who has been pregnant, gone through the the relative horrors of pregnancy and childbirth, and oh my God, the things that you see a woman go through in childbirth, and then within a few days they're like, "When are we going to have our next one?" You're like, "Oh my God, you want to have a next one after that? Didn't you see that bloody, gory mess? Don't you remember the screams of terror? Oh, look at our cute little baby. Let's have another." And so it's like the innocence is reborn. And I think that that's what happens with this stuff. Our innocence is lost, but then a little time passes, time heals things, and then we move on and our innocence comes back again, and we're shocked all over again the next time it happens. Now, one thing I will say about that is probably why it is good to not make huge sweeping legislative changes in the aftermath of horrific tragedy. Because I think that that is where we run into problems with potential legislation in the future. What's going to happen when you legislate? And I don't use knee jerk as a huge negative here. Saying knee jerk, the instantaneous reaction. We must do something about this now. And so let's legislate. And you do that, then you've got legislation that later it's kind of like you want to modify that, or you need to change that, or you did too much too soon. Now, granted, we've had a lot of these incidents take place over the last 20 to 30 years. And they've gotten some of them progressively worse. Some aren't as bad as others. And I say that, trust me. Somebody's going to say, oh, well, Scotty Roberts said, well, some mass shootings aren't as bad as others. They're all bad. You know what I'm saying. Some of them are not as many people. Some of them are, so you could categorize them as saying, seeing 31 people killed is worse than seeing 14 people killed. They're both bad. They're both heinous, but that's what I mean when I say we register them on the Richter scale of mass murders as being a 3.0 instead of a 7.2. But there's still loss of life, and there's still tragedy, and there's still sadness. So when you make this legislation, you have to make sure you make legislation with a clear mind, with clear minds and level heads. It's like I said to somebody today. I said, somebody who was taking me to test, they rabbit trailed all over the place in their argument. We're talking about the mass shooting, and then he throws out there that Trump is a fascist and all his followers are fascists, and I responded and I said, I disagree with you on the fascist thing. And he said, why are you talking and arguing with me about fascism when this is all about the loss of life? I said, dude, you brought it up. I said, I'm responding to one thing at a time. I got to tell you, folks, just because there has been a tragedy does not mean the world stops. There's part of the world that stops. There's part of our innocence that is gone again. There's part of our hearts that stop. But the world swirls on around us. And you still have to maintain. And you have to maintain the things you were doing. Now, if it were my family that were shot, my reaction would be different. I wouldn't maintain certain things the same way. But as my friend told me, who I was talking to today, he said, damn it, can't we just... He says, I know that there are different political points of view, but can't we just stop to grieve together without the political wrangling? And my answer is, no, we can't. You have a few people you can do that with. But then you also have all the people who want to start casting the blame button, pushing the blame button, casting the blame vote. And it becomes political arguments, and people want to defend their person. And somebody else wants to blame that person or that thing or that video game or whatever it might be. Somebody came on today. Oh, it was, I think it was Yahoo News or something like that, which is totally anti-Trump. Yahoo News said something about now Trump is blaming the video games for what happened. I'm like, no, he's not. He mentioned video games as one of the sources of things that are probably degrading. And this is not, he's not speaking out of his asshole. He's talking about things that have been studied, researched, and talked about for many years. There are times my own kids, because they play video games sometimes, I don't let them play shoot 'em up games. They play Minecraft and different things like that. They parrot some of the things that are said in those video games. And I'm like, okay, that's enough. I don't need that. And it's not usually anything really bad. I have more problems with the cartoons that my kids watch nowadays. And I would say that some of my kids' attitudes are governed by things that they watch and learn characters doing on, especially on all these Disney Channel type of internet sitcoms for kids. I listen to the way those kids talk to each other on those shows. Everybody's caustic, everybody's biting. People love each other, and like there's always some moral to the story, the simplistic, overly simplistic moral they reach. But in the process, the way they talk to each other, the tricks they play on each other, the things they do to each other, the lies they tell to make a comic effect take place for the course of the story, a fictional vehicle. And I would never lie to my friends the way I see characters lie on some of these kids' sitcoms on Disney. And yet, these are fictional things. These are shows that they build to keep kids' interest. And you know what? When I see my kids repeating that stuff or repeating the things they hear, when my little child, my 4-year-old, looks at my older daughter and calls her a butt wipe, it's funny, and I laugh with my wife, but I say, is that what I want my kids saying when she goes to kindergarten this year? Or is that just what's to be expected from little kids? I'm no purist. I'm no Puritan, let's put it that way. I'm not puritanical. I'm not prudish. I am none of those things, but there are certain things I have said before. I like to preserve my children's innocence for as long as I can. And in some respects, that's already gone. They've seen too much. They experience too much. They hear too much. My older one, obviously more than my younger one. So my 10-year-old boy, he sees and hears things. And anyway, these are things that I look at and I say, when I hear the president say, there might be a problem with video games and we have to look into this. When you've got the top 10 video games out there that are heinous destruction of life. Did you know that there's a Columbine? Everybody out there, raise your hand. Do you remember what Columbine was? That was 20 years ago. They've got a Columbine game where you can play one of the shooters and go in and shoot kids in school. They've got games where you're ripping out spines and things, and some of these are a little older. I'm not into the gaming world, so I don't know them all that much. I know them well enough because I enjoy the graphics. I watch Assassin's Creed, watch it. And see, hear me. I say I watch it. I've never played it. I watched a friend play it and I really enjoyed it because the graphics were so cool and the history was so cool. But even that game isn't as bloody violent as I've seen some other games. And so the president said, based on things he's been advised, based on things I'm sure he has heard and learned, he says these are things that we have to look into to find out what kind of influencers these things are on our kids who grow up and do some of these things. You have these categories, and I've heard it put that there's like 4 different categories for these shooters that are out there. You could have the category where they are mentally ill. And this is where somebody and I've really stayed away from saying too much about people being mentally ill, but when you're talking psychosis or psychosis is not the word, psychotic behavior, cold-blooded killing, what makes somebody do that? Well, one could be mental illness, that they're on some kind of medication, that they are genuinely psychotic or have some sort of pathological psychosis of some sort that needs to be dealt with, and that is either undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or overdiagnosed, and they're on meds, and these things have affected them. And they will make those kinds of bad decisions that end up with heinous murder and death, things like that. There are those types that are out there. Then you have those who are, what if they're a religious zealot? And this is somebody who kills because he believes this is what his God would have him do. We've seen that in Islam. We've seen that in Christianity in some, a little more ancient than now. But You've seen a lot of stories out of the Crusades and things like that. I don't believe the Crusades were all about wiping out the infidel. There were other purposes behind them, but you did have heinous acts committed during the Crusades. You had heinous acts. Let's take the Crusade factor out of it. Go back to we talked about this once before with the Library of Alexandria and the murder of Hypatia of Alexandria, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the attack of the people who ran the library and taught there, all run by Cyril, Saint Cyril of Alexandria, who for the Catholic Church became a saint, but he was the bishop of Alexandria. And he said that the library was filled with pagan literature. And so they stood against the library and they eventually burned it down. Hypatia was able to save some of the manuscripts. She was one of the teachers there, as was her father. And because she was a woman, Cyril stood against her. She shouldn't be speaking. She wasn't Christian. She was pagan by his standard. And he had his people stop her chariot in the street and took her out of her chariot, stripped her naked, flayed her alive, and burned her at the stake. And so you have things within Christianity where these atrocities were committed in the name of God. Mass murder was committed in the name of God, in the name of Allah, in the name of. I don't think I've ever heard a Buddhist commit a mass shooting in the name of Buddha. It's a different kind of philosophy and religion. But mostly in the Abrahamic religions, you will find that there have been groups that will take it upon themselves to try to force their religion on others by killing them. And if they refused, killed them. You had it in ancient Judaism as well. So these things exist. Let's see. What did Scott say? I don't know about bananas, but after a trip to the zoo, I had an urge to throw poo once. Well, there you go. So it all depends on what influences you, Scott. So religion is proof of how easy the mind can be controlled. I agree, Joyce. Absolutely 100%. And Lewis says, I'm a gamer and I never wanted to shoot up real people. Well, that's it. Neither would I. I've played a couple of games. I played a Lord of the Rings game once where I was Aragorn and I used my sword to hack my way through things. You know, sometimes you could come out with your adrenaline built up. But I never felt like going out to shoot up anybody. But I think that there are some minds, Lewis, I say this to you and to everybody, there are some minds that are probably susceptible to that. Some minds that breaks down, it's a contributing factor. So it's worth, this is my whole point with the Yahoo article that said President Trump blames video games for mass shooting. He did no such thing. That's a headline that is an attention getter, a clickbait. It gets people reading their sensationalized article, which is anti-Trump to begin with. And I've never seen so much anti-presidential stuff in my adult life that I've seen since Trump became president. So people want to deny that, but it's a fact. So this article says Trump said video games caused the mass shooting. Well, no, he didn't either. He referred to that as a factor that's being looked into because there's been so much study on this kind of thing and research as to how video games affect Lewis. Maybe not you, maybe not me. We're a little older, we're a little more mature. We know how to handle this stuff. Even if you grew up with it, you may have a good enough background, enough common sense and intelligence to know. But every now and then you will hit that person who doesn't, and they will carry that over. What it does, and what I have heard, is some of these games, these especially extraordinarily violent games, for a younger mind, it can leave them with this whole idea that life is valueless, that I can do things and get away with them. Now, maybe we'll do a show on that. We'll talk about this specifically. I'd like to get some people in on that and talk about it from a special point, specialists or people that know their stuff, experts in these things, and talk about that in the future. But as for tonight, all I can do is parrot what I've heard, and that is that there are some people that can be susceptible to that. You expose a young kid long enough to violent acts on television, violent acts in video games, things like that. Can that kid possibly be influenced in the back of his head by that? Can that change a kid's view of the value of life? Perhaps. It all depends on his parental upbringing, I think. Depends upon his family life. It depends. And this is one of the things I said where we have in the past, we see these things and we're shocked and horrified and we lose our innocence, but then it comes back. And I think over the decades, we've seen a little bit further moving out each decade from, let's say, what we had in parenting and home life in, look at the 1940s, at post World War II. Look at the 1950s. There was a certain kind of parental style of family life that was considered ideal, the way we taught our kids and so on. Then the 60s came along, and the kids of those people moved further away from that. And then their kids, which is my generation. Well, technically, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in that last few weeks of what they consider to be the baby boomer era in November of 1960. And so I'm technically the son of a baby boomer, but I'm still a baby boomer. I'm only 18 years old, younger than my mom. So we're almost kind of in the same era there. And so my kids grew up being very separate and very different politically from what I raised them to understand. And that's their choice. They get out into the world and they see things. So this is what I'm talking about. In many families, as we got into the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, parenting changed. Parenting styles changed. Remember when the word yuppie was big? Or dinks, dual income, no kids? That was in the 90s. That might have even been the 80s. But these dinks, these dual income, no kids. Then when they had kids, finally, as they got a little older, well, almost like me, I was 31 before my twin daughters were born, my first kids, who are now 27. And when that generation started having kids, all of a sudden they were a little less attached, a little more detached. Both parents worked. Both parents were outside the home. Then it became, traditionally when I was a little kid, mom stayed at home. There was a stay-at-home mom, and dad went to work and earned the bacon. Mom kept the home front. That was tradition. That seemed to be the way it was all through time until, when we got more enlightened about 40 years ago. And then it's okay. Women got out in the workplace, got no problem with it. I look at my daughters, amazing entrepreneurs. I'm all for what they're doing. I don't have any problem with that. So don't interpret or misinterpret anything I'm saying here with that, because then it turned into, well, maybe dad could be the stay-at-home dad and mom could be the one working. Think of Michael Keaton, Mr. Mom. Remember how big that movie was if you're around my age and you saw that movie come out in the 80s? Mr. Mom, the stay-at-home dad. And mom went back to work. And so we see family unit changing. We see the way we traditionally had done things, at least in the West, changed dramatically. And now I'm speaking in generalities, so don't anybody go apeshit over this. But what has happened as a course of that is that there have been families where there has been less parenting, and the parent becomes the television set, or as they called it when I was a little kid, the boob tube, they called it. And it was, you babysat your kids by sitting them in front of the television set. And so you would have your spare time instead of spending time with them, or because you had to work. And so your kids grew up on the TV. I look at my own mom, who was a single mom when I was a little kid. Didn't know my dad when I was a little kid. After 6 years old, I had a stepdad for a few years, but my mom raised us. I think of that. My mom was the age my daughters are now, 27 years old. And she was raising three children on her own, working at a waitress at a local bar in Northeast Minneapolis. And that's how we got by. And we got by because my grandfather, her dad, made sure we didn't go under. So he gave her the help that she needed. But there was a single mom who we grew up on the TV. We grew up on pot pies and TV dinners. Our mom taught us how to do all that stuff. And it wasn't until she got a little older, of course, when we kids went off to school and stuff, where she finally was able to make it a little better. She's an entrepreneur. She's had her own business for almost 30 years, but not when we were kids. So I was one of those latchkey kids. You know, you'd come home after school and there was no parent home. And so we'd come in and my mom would be usually off to work for the night. She would have to leave about the time just before we got home, and she'd waitress the night shift. And so she wouldn't be home till midnight, and most nights of the week and weekends. And so that's how we grew up. No shame to my mom. Nothing negative I'm saying, but this is how society changed for the most part. And so kids that grew up, many of them that grew up without parental attention, and we still got parental attention, so we were fine. But kids who grew up without it, generally speaking, the generation changed things a little bit. And so in 50 years, U.S. society will look completely different from today, says Brian Parker. How you doing, Brian, by the way? Yes, absolutely. 50 years from now, we probably won't recognize the way things are done. And so there is that factor that plays into why they would say, have video games become the surrogate for some kids, and they pick up some of their values, believe it or not, off of a stupid video game. And so this is all the president was referencing when he said that. He's referencing probably having information thrown across his desk about this and said, this is one of those topics that need to be looked into. And so he made mention of it. He did not blame the mass shootings on video games. That's the point. This is where the spin comes in. And this is where the people that you talk to and interact with on social media like to take off on this. And then I don't know how many times today I heard Trump was a fascist. Trump was Hitlerian. And all of and somebody said to me today in one of my posts, early today, it was either earlier today or it was yesterday, but it was being talked about still today. Somebody said something about Trump having what was the word used? Dictatorial policies. And I said, really? And the post was that general. There were no details. Well, what do you expect from a guy who's, and this and that, has dictatorial policies and all that? And I said, could you please help us out? Could you spell out some of those dictatorial policies? What are Trump's dictatorial policies? Like there is such a thing. And I asked, and several hours went by, nothing. So I think it was yesterday when it started, because I asked again this morning. And I said, because there was no response, and I just wanted to rub it in a little bit, because I knew she had no answer for this. And I said, still waiting for that answer. I said, you're totally welcome to express yourself. I'd love to hear some of Trump's dictatorial policies. And then a couple of other people came in and said, I don't think you got anything, do you? Blah, blah, blah. And eventually she said something else, and as her explanation, and the explanation was, you know what? It might be worth calling this up, because the explanation was not an explanation at all. Let's see. I'll see if I can find this for you. So why don't you talk amongst yourselves as I look? But it's in here somewhere. Hold on. And then I've got some of my, by the way, my leftist and liberal friends. Every single post I put up, they got to come in and give their liberal slant and why I'm wrong and why that person's wrong and blah. It gets old really quick. But here, let me scroll through here, see if I can find anything. Well, there's this guy. This isn't the same one. So let me see if I can remember what this person said. They brought up, well, Trump, he's anti-press and he's what are all these things that she said? There are two or three or four different things that were that simplistically described. Anti-press. That's exactly what Hitler did on his rise to power. And I said, really? I said, interesting. I said, that's your response to telling me what are his dictatorial policies? I said, isn't a policy a thing that is implemented? Did Trump implement something with the press? No, he criticized the press, called it fake news and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff that's being said. And I said, I'm so tired of hearing these things that are superficial, emotively driven. Now, it's not that I don't emote. You've all seen me enough. I emote a lot. I emote. I get pissed off about things. I'm emotional now about the way I express certain things, even this evening while we're talking here. Yet, I think I have a good common sense head about me. I try not to say anything that is just a blatant I'm spewing on you out of my hatred for somebody or dislike of them. I don't call myself intolerant on one hand and then I'm or tolerant on one hand and I'm completely intolerant on the other hand. I just don't do that in my criticisms. And so let's see. I got somebody here. There's probably even new criticisms for me in here. Let's see. This is a friend of mine. This might be the same post. This might be the post right here. Hold on. I'm looking. This might be it right here. Let's see. Okay, here's a for instance. This isn't the one I'm looking for. But this is the kind of response I get. Now, you see if you've heard anything like this today. Somebody came into my post. My post was this. I said, and I was quoting Bill O'Reilly, political pundit. He said, there's no question that Congress will introduce bills in September that limit Americans from acquiring high caliber weapons and ammo. And I think President Trump will sign something to that effect. Most Americans have had it with innocent people being murdered by maniacs. Since 2000, 475 people have lost their lives in mass shootings. That number includes 236 dead during the Obama administration. Under President Trump, 102 have now perished, counting the atrocities this weekend in El Paso and Dayton. It's beyond revolting that Beto O'Rourke, presidential candidate, loser, dumbass in my book, my opinion, immediately blamed President Trump for the weekend murders. O'Rourke is pretty much finished after looking foolish during the presidential debates, and now he's using a catastrophe for political advantage. Lowe doesn't even come close. Now, that was the quote I posted today, and I had various people commenting on it. Had some conservative people that I know comment on it. It pulls all the liberal people I know out of the closet. Let's see. Goes on and on and on. I'm looking for a particular post. One of somebody I've known for a long time said, sadly, a lot of people are blaming Trump because of the shooter's public support of the more hateful things Trump has said. Right or wrong, his continued lack of thought before speaking has stirred up those who are willing to kill for their beliefs. And of course, there's a rash of responses to that. I said, I would disagree. I disagreed with Obama's political ideologies for 8 years, but I never went out and shot anybody because of it. That takes a special kind of psychotic. And then this person said, well, you aren't like these people. You use common sense. I said, well, I can't argue with that. Somebody else said the Boston bomber didn't use a gun. And how many did he kill? No guns bigger. So these are the kinds of arguments that are going on. This isn't the one I was looking for, but it's interesting that what is the incident you hear about more in the news today from the weekend? It's the one where they say the kid was a pro-Trumper, was conservative, and he was white and white supremacist, wanted to kill Mexicans and so on. You don't hear about in Chicago the gang shooting, the mass shooting that was gangland related, not committed by a white supremacist. So the news kind of puts out there what they want people to hear because they're building a narrative. And if you've noticed, since they can't get Trump on Russian collusion or on obstruction of justice, because you can't obstruct justice for something that you didn't do, they can't get him on those. You notice it keeps moving. They keep moving the goal line. Now the new thing is his racism, because he said something about the Gang of Four, the squad, as they're being referred to in the news. And because they were all women of color, all of a sudden Trump is a racist. Well, just because they're women of color or people of color doesn't mean they can't be stupid too and deserving of criticism. You know how Trump is. He criticized him. And so he's more and more of a racist. And every day the racism thing builds. Now what is it? There's the shooting, and everybody wants to blame Trump's hatefulness, his racism, his policies, everything. And they're using this, folks. I guarantee you. They're using this to distract people, to have people arguing about it out there. And the they, by the way, is not the ubiquitous they. It is the leftist they. The news media, predominantly leftist, no doubts, no questions about it, are pushing that message to people. The left can't just report that this sad, tragic thing happened. America, let's all come together and think about these families. A day after it happened, you've got news outlets blaming the president, blaming the racism of the president, blaming Yahoo today, saying that he's now saying video games are responsible for it. He didn't say that, but they paint a picture that they want the American people to understand and know. And it's the picture that they are painting, which makes their acts heinous as well. They're not killing people, but you do the math and you look at what they're doing. I said here, I said to one of these people in my post, I said, this is my point precisely. People blame President Trump because they support what his opponents have called hateful things. If anyone is stirred to mass murder groups of innocent people by anything Trump or anyone else says, they have a pathological psychosis that drives them to commit those psychotic acts. Nobody who thinks or possesses an ounce of common sense should blame anyone except the killers. Nobody is to blame except the people who pulled the trigger. Now, I had somebody I know came in and said, Scotty Roberts, the people who hurted other people, wait till you hear the comparison being made. The people who herded other people into gas chambers weren't psychotic. They had families that they went home to and had dinner with. The men who rounded people up, led them to the edge of a ditch, and then shot them in the back of the head were just being good soldiers. And he's, of course, talking about the Third Reich. And I said to him, I typed out a big response and then I withdrew it before I posted it. And I just simply said, you're correct, but that's not at all what happened here in these shootings this last weekend. That's the problem. People want to continue to make this Hitlerian Third Reich sort of comparison when none exists except that which is created by the sensationalism. Let's see if I can find this other post because I want to tell you what this other person had to say. Let's see. I've got to scroll back a little bit here. Let's see. Which post was it? Is the question. Oh, I had a foreign friend of mine saying, sorry, but I think he's Italian. He said, sorry, but why Americans need weapons to live in security? Because the right to have weapons, to protect people, to stop, to offer pink tiny rifle for girls of 6 years, for example, more. Nobody thinks that, and now I'm reading, English is not his first language. He says that an impossible way that mass murder are directed by the NRA secrets groups or lobbying and decided by U.S. From my memories, I've never read or listened to anybody mention that idea. It could be really possible, in my opinion, far from the American life. Okay, but from European personality, I don't envy weapons right for all of us because it's too risked. And many sadness, more to come. It will never stop. Open your eyes. Okay, so he's obviously thinking that the fact that we have weapons in America is the problem. Let's see. I'm going to move on and see if I can find this other post because I want to read this to you. What was said. Is this it? I'm getting close, folks. So I'll hit this. I want to hit this up, but I want to find out where it's posted. Let's see. It's either in here or it's in the other one. So I clicked something wrong. Okay, I'm not going to find it fast, and I don't want to use up valuable time to be digging and searching for this, so I'm not going to find it, that other one. But suffice it to say, this is where we are. And another quote I heard today, this was Sam Harris. He said, in the aftermath of horror, we seem to learn nothing of value. That's his takeaway. And while he's a very intelligent person, top-notch critical thinker, I would say, I don't agree with his take on Trump. I don't believe Trump is a racist. I don't believe he's a xenophobe. And he presented that. Those thoughts, too. He was very common-sensed about it. And he gave his reasoning behind it. And sure, he can have his reasons. And I can listen and go, okay, I understand your reasoning behind that, but I disagree with you. But he did say that in the aftermath of horror, we seem to learn nothing of value. And I had to think about that for a second. By the way, I have a new chair. That's why I'm tipping backwards here, because I have the ability to do that now. In horrific situations like this, can you ask yourself, what is your initial response when you hear these things? Do you jump to the gun to blame the president or defend the president? Do you find yourself in all these heated arguments about politics, about the Second Amendment, which then goes into the Constitution, and is it even a viable document anymore, to the form of government we have, to the cost of condominiums on Miami Beach. All of these things, it starts to rabbit trail tributaries out from the main current that everybody wants to get into. So do you find yourself stuck in some of those, or being drawn into those, or having opinions about those, as opposed to just sitting back and saying, are we grieving over the loss? And is the loss so far away and this stuff becomes so commonplace that it doesn't have the same effect on us anymore. We've grown used to seeing mass murders. Now, that, by the way, folks, if you disagreed with the video game thing and you agree with the fact that we've become a bit desensitized to this, those two are the same things. It's the brain desensitizes desensitizes us to things it becomes used to. So if you find yourself a bit desensitized by mass shootings, oh boy, here we go again. Oh no, this is tragic, but here we go again. Prep myself up for a political argument with somebody today. Instead of us being shocked and horrified and being in a process of grieving together with those we disagree with over the loss of life. And when I compared it to the video games just now, I meant that. There's a desensitization process that our brains go through. And some of these people who are constantly using these video games, especially at a more moldable age in their mind, can desensitize themselves to it. That's the comparison I was making there. So I want to see what some of your comments are before I go on. Let's see. Scott Bowers was told, he said, I was told I was a racist because my son-in-law is black. The word racist has lost its power. How can you be a racist if your son-in-law is black? I don't even see the correlation, Scott. What was that person talking about? Did you look at him and wrinkle your face and go, what are you talking about? Racist because your son-in-law is black. And you are right. Racist has lost its power. Right now, I saw somebody else, Joe Scarborough from MSNBC. I saw a little clip of him today where he outright said the president was racist, and that was what caused these shootings today. What a bunch of nonsense. We can talk about that more, too. If you've got some thoughts on that aren't in here, put them in. But Trapper Mike said being a white police officer am I automatically racist? Yeah, you are, Mike. Of course you are. You're white and you're a cop. That's a double whammy against you right there. Let's see. Initial thoughts, says Brianna. I can't believe a person could do such an act. We should send favor toward their family, period. Exactly. And you know what? What is something that my good friend Jeffrey Dougherty has said? Those who oppose you. This is something that really impressed me about something he said a while back. Those that oppose you, call favor down on them and see what that does for you. And many times they won't know that's even happened. The one experiencing it is you. When I call favor down on people who hate me or people who oppose me, I'm doing it not only for them, but for myself. Because I'm the only one who might know that ever even happened. I've got coffee here. Which is cold. It was hot when I brought it in at the beginning of the show. So, is that a tack that we can take? Let me ask you. Let's change gears for a second here. Mostly because of what you just said, Brianna. And it reminded me of what Jeff said. And things I used to teach when I was in ministry I would teach when I was in ministry in Christian theological. You know what I'm trying to say? Christian ministry. My theology was Christianity. And I used to teach the kids in my youth group. I would say to them, if somebody has offended you, be the first person to go to them and forgive them. Likewise, if you have offended someone else, be the first person to go to them and ask for forgiveness. I said, if you really want to live the life of a true believer in Christ, a Christian, I said. Let's take away all the other teachings you might have heard, or the unindoctrinating you might have heard. Within that religion, I said, you need to go be the first to make things right, to find a way to level the ground back out, to offer the forgiveness or ask for the forgiveness. Always be the first. Don't let the other person beat you to the punch. Get there and show that you are willing to humble yourself and be that person. And seek the peace. And so what if we took that in politics? And I'm guilty of it too. You know, I can get into a good political fight with anybody, especially if I'm challenged or somebody calls me something and I could brush them off. Who cares? Two people on the internet or 200, whatever they may be. I could move away from that, not say a thing. Sometimes you have to defend your honor. Sometimes you have to defend your beliefs. Sometimes you're called upon to defend your belief. Sometimes you call yourself to defend your belief or your stance or your position. Then other times, you're called to seek peace. You're called to be the one to pursue peace. Why is there so much infighting? Why is our country so divided? It's because everybody has to stake their claim in their political point of view. Many are just followers of somebody else that's doing that. And we have all this infighting, but we don't even, during times of horrendous disaster, calamity, tragedy, find our way trying to clear the ground to find peace. How do you find peace? You know what just popped into my head? It's that old film. It wasn't a movie, a full-length movie. It was a little film that was made. I don't know when. I saw it when I was in high school or something, or college. And it was that story about in World War II when the American soldiers, it was Christmas Eve, and they ended up celebrating Christmas Eve with the German soldiers across the line. I don't remember all the details of the story, but I think it was one of the Germans started singing, you know, the "Oh Christmas Tree" song or something like that, or Silent Night or something. And then the Americans joined in and started singing. They were on opposite sides of the line. It was nighttime. It was winter, snowy. And they all started singing together. And they all then shook hands, crossed the line and shook hands. And they all had coffee together and some food together and celebrated Christmas together. Enemies. They started out with mistrust. And it's a true story. It's a true tale. It's not just a fable from World War II. And I don't know enough of the details. It just popped into my head. Otherwise, I'd have looked it up ahead of time. But these were men who then the next day had to go back to fighting each other. And I think they ended up going their separate ways. They parted and they did not fight the next day, but they had to go back to their respective armies. And these were men who said, what is in our heart is greater than what our politics are telling us to do or our leaders are telling us to do at this moment. We have found unity on something, and we're going to celebrate that unity. And so here's the question. Do you find ways to find the unity when it needs to be there? Finding unity, also, finding peace in something doesn't mean you lay down and become a mat for somebody to wipe their feet on. That's not what finding peace is all about. But do you take the time to think about how can I make peace with this? Today, the times where I said things today, I was in battle mode, but I felt reasoned battle mode. I wasn't going to get into a fight with anybody, and I wasn't going to be drawn into one. but I wanted to say things that say, no, I think you're incorrect because this is the way that happened. This is what history says, and so on and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. And somebody else was talking about history today. Oh, that's the whole title for tonight's show, is talking about fascism, because somebody claimed Trump was a fascist. And I already mentioned that earlier. That was in his statement. If Trump's a fascist, then he went, all his followers, you're fascists. And I said, do you really even historically know what a fascist is? And that seems to be an old argument now because it comes up so much. I said, dude, I don't even want to speak to that. I said, because it's so overdone. I said, but don't you know by now that that argument has been deconstructed long ago? What was on a Doctor Who? I see something was on a Doctor Who. Officers stomped it out. So, oh, you're talking about that scene? Yeah, maybe Doctor Who picked up the story and used it. The old time code of honor that's long dead, right, Iowa X. Garth Brooks did a beautiful song about it. I'm not sure. I probably have heard that song. Scott says he asks the clown to distract his adversaries, and sometimes we do become friends. Sometimes I do that too. Scott, I don't act the clown, but I try to get comic relief in when people are getting really hot and heavy with me. And sometimes they accept it and laugh. Sometimes they don't. So, let's see. Because the rules of engagement are different. Somebody said, Iowa, I'm not sure what you were referring to with that. Let's see. Anton G. Mussolini was the godfather of fascism. Yeah, he was almost the inventor of fascism, practically. And so, yeah, I brought up definitions. Somebody called Trump a tyrant today to me. And I said, really, what's a tyrant? I said, it's the same person. It's a fascist and he's a tyrant. And I said, what's a tyrant? And they gave their lame reasons. And I said, wait a second, isn't a tyrant? It's an absolute ruler. I've got the definition Merriam-Webster right up in front of me. An absolute ruler unrestrained by law or constitution. A ruler who exercises absolute power oppressively or brutally. And I said, when has Trump done any of those things? I haven't seen that in our president. I said, when has he stopped being accountable to the Congress, being accountable to the people? What act has he been able to enact or commit by which he is not held responsible to the Constitution? He's not held accountable, to the Constitution. He is responsible to act constitutionally, or he will be called on it. If this president did something unconstitutional, do you think for a minute he wouldn't be called on it? That there wouldn't be some kind of legislation, that something wouldn't be said, something wouldn't be done about it? No. Of course that would have happened if he'd done that. So, yeah, Trump is not a tyrant. Why do you think the media continues to ignore compassion, scholarship, and instead picks on Neil deGrasse Tyson for posting what many of our thinking but fail to put into words? Asks Philip Blair. Philip, I'm not sure what you're referring to with Neil deGrasse Tyson. As far as compassion scholarship, I haven't heard that used as a title for something before, believe it or not. And if I have, it's gone in one ear and out the other, but I've heard what it's all about. Probably heard what it's all about without using the title. If I were to parse that down, the media continues to ignore compassion scholarship and instead picks on Neil deGrasse Tyson for posting what many of us are thinking. I haven't seen Neil deGrasse Tyson be picked on, I guess. I see him as a scientist, and he's therefore almost one of the darlings of the media. He's not, I don't know if he's an atheist, but he is certainly not pro-religion. So I would see him as somebody that would fit right in and fall right into the hands of the press. So I'm not sure, Philip, what you're getting at there. If you can clarify that, Love to comment on it. Love to see what you're thinking. Chris Jones, aloha. He says, just wanted to say hello to all of you wonderful people. I think highly of your hugs to everyone. Good to see you. Let's see. Anton G, pardon my Canadian, eh? I'm close enough to Canada. It's 6 hours north of here. Let's see. I want to see what else is going on here. Anton, I like Trump too, frankly. Let's see. I'm going to back up a little bit and see some of these comments that were here. Joyce says, maybe we got too many returns here who have to work out their karma. Maybe we got a lot of bad habiters here now all at the same time. That's possible. I don't know. I don't know what to call this stuff. I hear all kinds of things, from yugas, Kali yugas to reincarnation to all of this other stuff. You don't know what to believe anymore about any of this stuff. We can choose what we want to believe, but isn't that what I did when I followed Christianity? I was indoctrinated because I chose to believe something. And so I'm very careful about what I choose to believe about things on a spiritual level anymore. Let's see. Susie Q. Somebody's praising Susie Q. What'd you say? Sending your enemy favor. That's good karma for you. That's what I saw earlier, Susie, and I was commenting on that. Is sending them favor. Iowa says transmutation is men not ejaculating and using it for better things. Well, there you go. That's one way of looking at that, Iowa. And at least that's not transubstantiation, which is the body and blood of Christ becoming the real body and the real blood of Christ. Jeannie says, I'm speaking to transmutation. Yes, I see what you're saying. Transhumanism, Philip Blair said. I'm going backwards here, so let's see what else we got. Audrey said, got to run. Thanks for hanging out. Adventure Town Communique with the one and only Scotty Roberts. Thank you, Audrey. You know me. You know where I'll be. So we'll see you all tonight on Rocky Stucci Show, she says. Let's see. Philip Blair, as I'm going backwards, you say DARE was just peer pressure and propaganda and very dishonest in equating all non-pharma drugs. Lying always falls eventually. Yeah, we were talking about that today. Something else I want to do a show on when I start my show is this whole issue of, Rocky has brought it up, it's this whole stem cell research. And why this is not, if stem cell research has been regenerating, why is this not, and I'm only hitting on it light just to say I want to talk about it later when I find out more about it. Why isn't it widespread? Why don't we know that? Is Big Pharma trying to close it down? It's possible. Big Pharma makes its money by continually selling you drugs to treat something, not to heal it. So what if you have a way to heal something? I want to look into that. I know Rocky knows these people well, and I wanted to talk with them as well, so I'll find out more. So let's see. Okay, I'm back to some of the things I saw earlier. I see a lot of good discussion going on in the chat room, and it's great. Brianna says, I wish people would watch his latest State of the Union speech. If you're talking about Trump, it was a fantastic State of the Union speech, by the way. The Chechens terrorist Obama brought in, the same guys that fought to the death in Iraq and Afghanistan. If you're talking about the Taliban, Iowa X, I'm assuming, because Trump said something about him being in talks with the Taliban, I'd rather see him in talks with the Taliban than us sending our kids over there to die fighting them. If they want to stay in their place, that's fine. You stay in your place. Don't bother us. We won't bother you. Boom. Have your life. But at what point does then the United States become the world's police? What if they did heinous acts? Are we then supposed to step in? Opens up a whole nother question. And I just don't know. Let's see. Scott Dower says, I figured out that you cannot tell, that you cannot tell a liberal anything. They say, let's see, I figured out that you cannot convince a liberal that anything they say is wrong or unreasonable. So I just have fun triggering them and sit back and eat my popcorn and watch the meltdown. Rocky and I are going to, I think, talk. I got some things I want to talk about with Rocky tonight about triggering liberals. It'll be fun when we get there. Let's see. Philip said, I never considered a difference of opinion in politics, in religion, in philosophy, as a cause for withdrawing from a friend. That's a Thomas Jefferson quote. Yes, I've seen that quote before, and I've posted it before. I am a big fan, if you will, of Thomas Jefferson. So I love some of the things he has to say. Let's see. Philip Blair, Susie Q. Keep in mind that Thomas Jefferson was also our president. Yes, he was. Let's see. All these things that we can get into. I see a lot of stuff in here. Trump wanted to go. Raptor says, 727 says, Trump wanted to go to work with social media after he had social media summit. What something they don't trust politicians. What them don't trust politicians. Jeannie says it shows how much they don't pay attention to what is actually happening. Travis stock needs to be discussed. Philip said the courts pointed to the word Muslim ban. And you know what? There wasn't a Muslim ban at all. There was a temporary travel ban on 7 different Muslim countries. That was it. And it was temporary, and it was done in a couple of months, just like all the naysaying for Trump on everything he's done. Oh, this is going to create World War III. The world's going to explode. People's heads are going to explode. The world's going to fall apart. Blah, blah, blah. And it all is exactly what Trump said it would be when he said it was going to happen. So the hype is always so much more than the outcome. If they just shut up. There's a part of me that wants to be peaceful, and there's a part of me that wants to say, shut the fuck up. To everybody, to everything I hear out there. So, wasn't it Jefferson who said the Constitution would give the president powers greater than a dictator? I don't know if he used those terms. I'd have to look up that quote again. It could. What was it that I always remember this? I know this is fictional, but I don't know if he actually said this in the movie Lincoln, Spielberg's Lincoln, with Daniel Day-Lewis playing the lead role, where he pounded on the desk and he said, I am the president of the United States, clothed in great power. And now I have heard that he did say that, or a very slight variation of that. And yes, the president of the United States, we've got this cavalier look at our presidents. If the president of the United States is equal to the premier of Russia, the prime minister of England, the prime minister of Germany, that he's on an equal status footing with all of these people on the world stage. Yeah, the president of the United States is clothed in great power. And they should be. But they have restraints. They have limitations. This is why we have our branches of government and checks and balances, to keep them all in a line with each other. So anyway, my topic for tonight, as I had mentioned, it was all about trying to talk about, when I brought up the word fascist in the opening graphic for the show, it was to say I'm sick of the kinds of responses I'm getting when we're talking about the tragedy of people being killed. And it becomes another vehicle for one side of the equation to blame the president and call him more names, and the other side of the equation to say, no, he's not, and to blame the other side. I don't think Obama's been blamed in this one yet, but there's all kinds of blame, all kinds of finger pointing, and so on. And I've really grown sick of it. This is when Rocky and I say, when we're doing the Situation Room, I'm so tired of talking about politics. But it needs to be talked about. It used to be fun to talk politics. It used to be fun to talk current events. Now all current events are nastiness and hate and bitterness and people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. That's half of our problem. I get out there and I make a statement today about what's going on, and you have 20 people come back at you who just want to talk about the orange turd in the office and what a hateful person he is, and it's all his fault, and blah, blah, blah. And that's where, it's like I called down favor on you, but shut up. That's the way you want to feel about it. So let's see. They're all banker puppets, says Raptor. And to a certain extent, yeah. And I think there might be cases where they don't even know they're banker puppets. I think Trump has paid off some debts, and I think he's kind of free to do his thing now. He's wheeling and dealing out there. I think Jeff has some things on that too, Jeff Doherty. So, let's see. I'm going to kind of leave reading the comments there. I've hit some of the highlights. I hope I didn't miss anybody's. If you've commented here and you really think I should have seen it and I haven't mentioned it, go ahead and just restate it for me so I see it. But do it in all caps so I see it and it stands out. But there is my message for tonight. Is we've all been shocked again. We've all had our innocence blown away again with the horror of things. Even though we knew in the back of our heads it was coming again. We know right now we're going to see more of this. But the knee-jerk reaction to create legislation and to point fingers and to point hate is the thing that I've grown really weary of. Let's take a moment to stop hating, to stop pointing fingers. That doesn't mean let your guard down. It doesn't mean don't defend yourself where you have to. It just means calm it down in yourself. Call down favor on others. And take a moment to grieve as a nation for what has happened. And then we have to find solutions. I have no solution to offer. I am a constitutionalist. I believe the Constitution and the Second Amendment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is valid and still valid. I don't think it applied to militia. There's something I told somebody today. There's 3 things you have to look at in examining any ancient text or historical text, archaic text. Things that are 250 years old aren't necessarily ancient. When you're talking history, they're historical. And it's when you're examining the text, you have to look at number 1. You have to look at the context in which it was written. To whom was it written? And for what purpose? 2, you have to look at the people who were receiving it and what they would have understood about that text. And 3, you have to look at the language that was being used and why that language was being used. Why were they saying what they were saying the way they said it, and to whom they said it, and what would they have understood? Those prerequisites have to be necessary when examining any text. And when you take it to the Constitution of the United States, the context was we had just come out of a war with Britain, won our freedom. There was a tyrannical government there. We were all hyped up about tyranny. Yes, the Second Amendment is written to the militias. The state militias needed to form an organized, well-kept, what's the word? I'm missing the word of the document itself. Militia. They had to keep a well-prepared militia, but at the same time, comma, the right of the individual to own weapons, the right of the people shall not be infringed. And back in the context when that was written, if you were part of the militia, you owned your own gun. You had to bring your gun to the militia. And so if the militia had to be prepared and you were called up and you didn't have a gun, that was odd, very odd. So the right was to protect the people's right to own their own weapons. And as many of the founders wrote about, I even called this up. I want to cover just a couple of things of these with you, because somebody said, well, the Constitution said this or that or the other thing. And I said, have you gone back and read the Federalist Papers? Have you read the writings of the founders to find out when they expanded on these Bill of Rights? The wording in the document is one thing. The expansion on it by the people who wrote it and stood behind it and signed their names to it is another thing. It's clarifying, it's amplifying. And it was written, the whole Second Amendment is to provide security for the people and for the people to have a last-ditch, if they ever needed to, the last-ditch effort to protect themselves from a tyrannical government. You can't do that with bows and arrows. That's not about hunting squirrels and deers. And by the way, and I brought up the same argument, it's become a bit cliche nowadays, but if the Second Amendment only applied to flintlock muskets and black powder and knives as weapons, well then, should the First Amendment then only be referring to standing on a soapbox in the public square is the only place you can express free speech, or in a written pamphlet of the day? Because that's all they knew of their day. Can't apply to the internet. It can't apply to anything else because that's all they knew in the day. And so the document itself is putting across principle that is supposed to transcend time. I'm pretty sure the founders, who were futurists, knew what they were doing. Now, when you look at the Second Amendment, I just think that this is important to look at a couple of these. What did the founding fathers have to say about the Second Amendment? George Washington said a free people ought not only be armed, but disciplined. Thomas Jefferson, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. Thomas Jefferson, I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. Thomas Jefferson also said, what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. It's like we used to hear, when your government wants to take away your guns, you can know your freedom is following not close behind. So the founders were all about possessing your weapons. And so this whole thing with these tragic mass shootings, any answer is not going to be a solution. Any answer is going to be every solution. There's always going to be somebody who hates the solution. And so what do you do when that happens? You stick to the document. You say the Constitution says this, so we have to fall within the guidelines of that Constitution, not change it. Let's see. The laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature. They disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Did you catch that? They disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage them to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Thomas Jefferson said that. Interesting quote. A strong body makes the mind strong. As to the species of exercises, I advise the gun. While this gives moderate exercise to the body, it gives boldness, enterprise, and independence to the mind. Games played with the ball and others of that nature are too violent for the body and stamp no character on the mind. Let your gun, therefore, be your constant companion of your walks, said Thomas Jefferson. The Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, and that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed. Thomas Jefferson. Does that sound like he's just talking about the military or the militia? On every occasion of constitutional interpretation, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying to force what meaning we may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, instead let us conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Thomas Jefferson said that. Let's see. There's a few more of these. I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. George Manson said that in 1788. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in most every country in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops. Noah Webster said that in 1787. They that can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Benjamin Franklin said that. If we in crafting laws as a reaction to mass shootings, which are a problem, and we do have to find a good way to find a solution for that, or an answer to it, or a way to detect it or prevent it or something. Benjamin Franklin, they that can give up essential liberty in order to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Boom. Bada boom. Bada friggin' boom. There it is. So, folks, Trump is not a fascist, even though my headline for tonight was going to talk about that. I was just going to hit upon it. Not a fascist. He's not a fascist by definition. Look it up. Historically, what was a fascist? Not what Trump is. Fascist was somebody who tried to take over the country by force, a tyrant, a dictator. Trump is not doing that. So you can look up the definition of that and find out what it means. We've talked about it here a little bit tonight, but you'll find out. Trump is not Hitler. He doesn't even follow a Hitlerian pattern, as some would like to say. Let us grieve a bit about what has happened in this country. Praying for people, by the way. I'm going to remember you in my prayers. To me, it's empty. It's empty. It's meaningless. Do it with your actions, not your prayers, not your thoughts. But at the same time, unify to grieve and find ways to express that to others. All right? And that's all I got. And so I think I'm going to wrap it up there tonight. It's already 10:35, 10:34 and a half. Rocky and I are coming on in a little under a half an hour with the Situation Room. Be there or be square. Go see my site at Son of a Patriot. Go to Rocky's and my website. It is Streaming Talk Radio. Those 3 words. Those 4. And I put up 4 fingers. That was good. I think that's for the .com. Those 3 words, streamingtalkradio.com. You can go there. You can see all about all of us. You can see how to get to Son of a Patriot. If you want to help sponsor me at all, because I don't have a donate button, help my research and the stuff I do, go ahead and buy some of our t-shirts. So go over there, take a look at them. Like this page, this video on the way out. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and we'll see you back here tomorrow night. I think we may do tarot tomorrow night. I'll surprise you and let you know when I announce it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for giving me your time. You don't know how much it means to me that you take your time to be here with me. And so you have a good evening. See you in Rocky's show in a little less than a half an hour. Thanks for being here, guys. Oh, let's see. Have I signed copies of our founding fathers? Have you signed your copies of our founding documents? Me? No, I haven't. Am I supposed to? I could sign that one up on the wall. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean, Philip. So a joke, I'm sure. So you all take it easy. I'll see you in a little bit on Rocky's show. See you back here tomorrow night. Thanks for being here. Good night, everybody.